We're all about the Archers. I'm Philippa and I'm with Quentin today because we are absolutely thrilled to be talking to the one and only Jane Garvey. Now, as I'm sure you all know, Jane was, I believe, the first voice on Radio 5 Live, presented Women's Hour for 13 years, co-founded Fortunately on Times Radio, the live show, and also doing the wonderful off-air podcast. And we often hear her mention her love of the Archers, so it seemed only right to talk to her. Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Philippa. Lovely to be here. I do mention the Archers a lot. That's partly to wind up my co-conspirator, Fiona Glover, who unaccountably doesn't listen to the Archers. Well, I don't understand it. I don't really. What's the point?
Yeah, I think we'll get onto that in a moment, I think, Jane, because this, Anyway, I just want to say that the day we happen to be recording this, Jane, is my birthday. So I regard having you on our podcast as the icing on my Colin the Caterpillar cake. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah. Have you eaten the end of the Colin the Caterpillar cake?
It is still in its box, but that is probably the best bit, isn't it? Yes, yes.
Well, it's arguable, isn't it? But
yes, I would argue against that myself.
Would you? Yeah,
yeah, it's too sugary.
Kind of with Philippa, but Quentin, happy birthday.
Thank you. But 2 years ago, you and I bumped into each other outside New Broadcasting House, and after we had a jolly good gossip about the BBC, we got onto a far more important topic: our shared love of the Archers. And you told me that you're always 2 weeks behind in your listening. Is that still the case, despite the Big George storyline?
Yes, I knew you were going to ask me this. It is still the case. In fact, I think I'm 3 weeks behind. But don't worry about spoilers, because I know what's happened, and I'm so excited to hear it. But I'm building up to it. I listen. I think everyone who is a big fan of the Archers, and I absolutely am one, we have our own way of listening, and we do it in our own way at a time that suits us. And my special time for the Archers is Sunday evening, either just on the sofa, relaxing with the newspapers and the Archers, usually at about 7:30, and then sometimes in the bath, but you don't need to hear about that. And then if I haven't finished the hour and a quarter, because I only ever listen to the omnibus, because those 13 minutes are not long enough for me. That's just not enough time in Ambridge. So it has to be an omnibus. And sometimes I listen on the Underground, which is a public transport network in London. And I now, because the BBC has dispensed with my services, I have to use public transport to get to work. Yes, so that's how I know everyone is different. And so please don't worry about spoilers. I do know what's going to happen. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well, we're recording this on Monday early evening, and this will go out at the weekend. So even more will have happened after our chat. But so what are your thoughts, Jane, so far on this George Alice storyline?
Well, I've loved it. It's brilliant because the Archers does these slow builds, doesn't it? Which you either go with, which is how you become a devoted Archers listener, or you can't be investing the time and the energy, so you don't become a committed Archers listener. We all know that things take time, and this has been agonising for those of us who feel very much for Alice, who hate all the judgment she's had to put up with, and are waiting for George, who is more than a troubled young man, isn't he? He's always presented a challenge to everybody in his life. Frankly, he's very irksome, and I have found his kind of slightly Andrew Tate inclinations. I think that's been really well written because it hasn't been overdone, but it was obviously an element of his personality for a while, and his family didn't know how to deal with it. And this is why I love the programme and I recommend it to people, because it does really try to keep up to date with stuff that is going on in people's lives. I'm afraid I know a number of people who are having to explain why Andrew Tate is wrong to their adolescent offspring. And who'd have thought that the Ambridge scriptwriters would acknowledge that too? Well, I would, because I do give them credit for being, in some cases, quite ahead of their time.
Yeah.
So, but I'm finding it. My levels of frustration now are such that I might have to listen to 2 omnibuses this week, because I mean, Alice, in the episode I've just listened to, Alice has just been to the hypnotherapist.
Oh my word! Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I was thinking perhaps, and she remembers that she put the car keys in the glove compartment, and yes, I can't wait for the reaction in Ambridge when George is uncovered. I really can't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to ask you in true Woman's Hour style, we need to talk about George, and we have. But do you think he's a lost cause, or do you think he's redeemable?
Well, I was asking myself this. If your child he's 19, isn't he? 18, 19.
Oh, yeah, 19,
Yeah, and I feel for his parents, I think, and for his wider family. Would I dob my child in if I knew they were going to be facing a prison sentence? I bet every listener is asking themselves that. We want Alice to, we want her to get justice, but what would you do? Because his grandmother's experience of prison lingers, doesn't it, over the family, and it's in their collective memory. And so this is a really painful episode, and I know one of my friends at the weekend said, "Oh God, I was so bored by what's his name starting school. That's young young Xander."
Yeah.
And the WhatsApp group and all that, because everyone I know just wants to get onto the meat of the matter, which is what's happening with George and Alice and everything. But that's all part of the potpourri of Ambridge life, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all sorts of stuff happening, very bleak stuff and very everyday stuff as well.
But what I find so interesting is, if he had admitted what had happened at the time, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as bad. There were mitigating circumstances and factors.
Yes, I mean, that's why it has been such a good storyline, because he actually he was trying to help her.
Yes.
He was.
Yeah.
And he let himself get carried away by the situation. And look, I've been a teenager, an adolescent. We do stupid things. We say stupid things. Sometimes they have truly terrible consequences. And so his story isn't that extreme in that way. It's probably another reason why it's been so compelling, because we can all imagine ourselves, what if I had done that back in the 1980s? I mean, it's just, it really has made everybody think.
I mean, if he pleads not guilty, this is going to go on forever, isn't it? But if he does do that, then I think the call log, which they can get off the mobile, the network provider, will prove that he phoned Will, and they hopefully can find the voicemail on Will's phone. That's my theory anyway, and I'm sticking to it. But I mean,
Okay, Quentin, no, I wouldn't accuse you of overthinking things, but you have devoted a fair amount of time to that.
I have.
Yes,
But
indeed.
but he might plead guilty, and none of this will happen.
Will he plead? Oh, good. Well, because we've had all the fandango about Alice's pleas. I'm not sure they'll carry us through George's as well, will they? Won't he just have to plead guilty for as light a sentence as possible?
But it would be nice to hear the court case.
It would. Yeah.
Okay, good point, Philippa. Yeah.
For listeners, it would be nice, but I agree that it seems sensible for him to plead guilty. But we are talking about George here. Of course, poor Joy will have to be a witness about selling him the fruit cider.
Has the story about Joy and her daughter, has that ever been?
Oh, I know.
No,
Rochelle.
that's
No.
hovering, isn't it?
Yes.
When was that?
I think she's a phantom daughter. I don't think she exists.
I've assumed she doesn't exist.
No, I don't think she exists,
I thought for a while she might be in prison.
Yes.
But I don't know. Yeah, but that's one of those back burner stories that's just disappeared, isn't it?
Philippa's always maintained she's on witness protection.
Witness protection, yeah.
Joy?
Yes.
Yeah. No, Rochelle.
No, Joy's on witness protection, so
Joy's
she doesn't see Rochelle. Yes, that's...
Joy?
I mean,
right.
I don't overthink these things at all.
No. Would you describe yourself as a devoted listener, Jane? But would you actually? Is it more accurate to say you're an addict or just a casual / reluctant listener?
It was on in our house growing up, and I was incredibly scornful, obviously, as you always are, and just I used to hear the music and And then one day you wake up and you realise you've become an Archers listener. You just have. And now it isn't an exaggeration to say that I can't imagine life without it. And that it's probably the only connection I still have with Radio 4 is the Archers, which I don't really link with Radio 4 because I do think of it as an actual place. And I've met some of the people who apparently there are actors in the Archers, which I find... Well, I do know that there are because I have met them and I've interviewed them about their acting. And I used to find that really... So I interviewed June Spencer, who was Peggy. And she... I've interviewed Meryl Streep. And June Spencer was much grander than Meryl Streep, let me tell you. I mean, she really was. But also, I will say, what a fantastic actress June Spencer was.
I agree.
Peggy was a great character, but she was actually a brilliant actress, really.
But Jane, also, you interviewed Patricia Green,
yes,
when she was celebrating 60 years in The Archers, and you played her some clips, the first found clips of her when she started in The Archers, and she couldn't even recognise her voice. It was
she's a lovely person, Patricia Green. I think I heard Alison Dowling talking about her on your podcast, and she was just saying how lovely she is, and she really did seem an absolutely lovely person. And I've also interviewed the person who died recently, who played the woman who was killed off, Phil's first wife.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember? She died in a fire the night that ITV opened.
Stables, yeah.
The stable, yeah. And she was another lovely woman whose acting career in Ambridge didn't last quite as long as she might have hoped, because she was pulled into the editor's office and told that she was going to be sacrificed for the BBC. So we've all been there. So the night ITV opened, she was killed in that fire. Yeah. So anyway, she didn't seem to be bearing any grudges, so that was good.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big shock for the actors if they are killed off. I mean, Graham Steed, who played Nigel, really hasn't got over it.
No.
Neither of the listeners. I mean, they're very upset that he was killed from...
Yes. I remember, that was on a Sunday night, wasn't it, when he fell off the roof?
60th anniversary, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes. I kind of... Do I miss him? Because the show has got Justin as a kind of upper class twit, but he's not.
Yeah.
They could do with someone. They could do with someone of that nature, couldn't they? And Elizabeth knocking around with the abattoir chap, I've never entirely reconciled myself to that. Casey Meads.
Casey Meads. Yeah.
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 Nigel, for me, was always a bit like Tigger. He's always sort of bouncing along and enthusiastic and very supportive of Lizzie. And yeah, we are missing that character. I don't think I could describe Justin as Tiggerish, really.
Well, Freddie's coming along though, isn't he? Freddie could be the new Nigel.
True.
Yes, I suppose. Yeah, he could be. But Freddie and Lily, for some reason, I've never quite attached myself to those two as much as some of the other characters. But they don't seem fully formed for me. Maybe I'm being a bit unfair. Lily had that bizarre affair with the older man,
Ross.
and I loved Quentin's question to Alison Dowling about whether his artwork was any good. Yes. I always suspected that Ross was perhaps something of a self-promoter. And wasn't actually Britain's greatest artist.
No. I imagined appalling acrylics, didn't you?
Yes, yes, exactly. Moody acrylics. Yeah, that would be as far as Ross could go, I think. Yeah.
It struck me, Jane, that the vast majority of listeners to the programme, this podcast, and members of our Facebook group are women. Why do you think The Archers appeals to them in particular?
I suppose it does. I'm just trying to think. Do I know? Why is that? I suppose it is a matriarchal show, isn't it? I'm overthinking this. I've got my, I've left Woman's Hour, but it never leaves you.
No.
I think
this is a safe space to overthink, Jane. So
okay, certainly to overthink about Ambridge. Yes.
Yeah.
It is a show that is largely moved by its female characters. So, yes, George's story is really interesting, but we're very invested in Emma and her reaction to it, and we feel her pain. And then you've got Peggy and Jill and Linda and all these phenomenal and Ruth and and Elizabeth. All these women for me are Pip. I think is quite interesting. All these characters are they are female, and they do.
Yeah.
They seem to. Is it that they keep me interested, or I don't know what it is? But I'm trying to think of which male character. Brian probably is my favourite character, but I miss.
Jane, I love you even more. Oh,
Well, I
brilliant.
miss Brian and Jenny though. I miss that dynamic.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there was some. Obviously, they had their ups and downs, but I love those scenes where Jenny would just have to leave him a slice of quiche for lunch because she was going out or something like that. And, they're quite gentle interplay between these two, and Jenny's kitchen and all that. I do miss that, and I'm not really. I want Brian to be back to his bad old ways, but he's been, he's got too much going on with Alice, and there was a bit of promise around his new relationship with the slightly overbearing lady, but we haven't heard much about her lately either. So
do you know, I've forgotten her name already. What's her name? She's great.
Miranda.
Miranda.
That's right. She was a
That's
friend
fun,
of Lillian. Yeah. Or was she an anniversary of Lillian? Yeah.
She used to be.
That's it.
Yeah. So I hope that is rekindled, because that was a great storyline. Yeah. We love Miranda.
Yeah.
She's great fun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, she was good. But more Brian, please.
Yes.
I need to. Charles Collingwood, who plays Brian, I've also met, and nobody wears a cravat like Charles. He's excellent value, whatever the circumstances.
Well, Philippa's laying in his bed.
Is she?
Yes.
Yeah. Recorded an interview in his bedroom.
How did it go?
I emerged unscathed. He was
Did
a
you?
gentleman.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he kept his cravat on at all times. Yeah. Yes.
No, it's jolly good fun. Yeah.
I mean, well, it's his sense of fun about the whole thing. I think we could do with more of it. I mean,
I agree.
The annual storylines, which are always about Linda not going. This time, she's not going to be in charge of something, whether it's the summer fete or the Christmas show, and of course, she will end up in charge of both of those things. And I think probably, can we not have another of those storylines, please? I feel as though we've all suffered enough there.
No,
frankly.
No escape.
So, Jane, when you hear the pantomime or Christmas production, irrespective of whether Linda is directing it or not, how do you feel? Because some people, yes.
Yes, well, those are the episodes I might be inclined to skip through if I'm... I know.
I love those.
Do you? Okay,
Yeah,
well, I mean, it's
do.
one of the great things about modern world is that we're not the same. It's all a bit meta for me. People who I've learnt are not real, acting in a pretend play. And no, I can't go there. No, I'm sorry. Can't do that.
I think I'm just involved in quite a few amateur dramatics, so I love to hear
Other
the
people.
pain that other people are going through.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yes. We spoken about the women, and you've mentioned Brian. I mean, maybe this is the answer to the question, but do any of the men in the Archers make you go weak at the knees, Jane?
Oh, gosh, I've realised how many of the cast I've met. Timothy Bentinck, who plays David. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was very good to meet him, but I think I met him at a social event, which was the last one I went to before lockdown in 2020. And it was a very bizarre evening. It was a kind of news quiz organised by Martha Carney. And it took place, I can't remember where, somewhere in central London. But we all felt at the time we were living on borrowed time. And I was on a table that combined the greats of Radio 4. So I was sitting next to David Archer. And it was just all a bit odd, because I think we all knew that we were on the cusp of some very significant challenge. but do you remember that time? It was all very cute.
It's weird. Very odd.
David Timothy seems a very nice man.
Yes.
Very nice man indeed.
But I mean, as you're probably aware, Jakob gets a lot of love from listeners. A lot of women find him very attractive.
I enjoy the way he just says things as they are. And it's rather subtly done. Again, I really do rate the scriptwriters here, because they are very, very clever the way they weave things in, and we just start to accept people. Although I had been puzzling over him, so I'm glad I've got that cleared up. That's good.
Yep.
So every week when we record our midweek episode, Jane, we have to come up with who we think is our star of the week, and there could be whatever reason for that. If you had to pick your star of the week at the moment, who would you choose?
Well, can I pick star of the week from 4 weeks ago?
Yes, absolutely. For this year so far.
Okay, well, you see, I'm a big fan. Well, my favourite couple are Harrison and Fallon.
Right.
It is Fallon he's married to, isn't it? And but I was sort of not taken for a ride. I really, and this sounds funny, and maybe it's just personal to me, I really wanted her to have a child. And I kind of, when she discovered she was pregnant, I wanted that to be a kind of happy ending. And then it didn't happen because we know about what she had a miscarriage. And but I think it's quite again, I'm praising the scriptwriters. I think it's very good of them, and not quite bold, but it's a good 21st century premise to have a female character who does not want children. So what I'm doing is I'm questioning my own. I would think, well, why wouldn't she want one? But that's me, and I'm not her. And she absolutely doesn't want children. And I wonder whether, I suppose deep down, I wonder whether she and Harrison will stay together. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the confrontation I'm particularly looking out for from the fallout from George is when Harrison confronts George, because of course he's been blaming Alice up to now, and he's now going to find out it was all down to George. So what happens in the police cell, Jane, is my query.
Well, Harrison's police career, as we know, is pretty much hanging by a thread anyway, isn't it? So hold back, Harrison. There's another character I've met, another very nice person who plays Harrison. I'm trying to think, is there anyone in the Archers I haven't met? But it doesn't. But all that to one side doesn't spoil my enjoyment, because I honestly don't think about the people I've met who play the characters when I'm listening to the programme. I met him in the late lamented Piazza outside the BBC's glittering broadcasting house, where I met you, Quentin.
Yes.
And Harrison agreed. He came on an edition of Fortunately, and I was absolutely, I was absolutely impressed.
Can we talk about red herrings, Jane? Because certainly when I'm listening to the Archers, I am overanalyzing everything and thinking, is this something that's they're going to revert back to, and shall I make a note about this? And will this become a much bigger story? Are you being analytical as you're listening, or is it pure escapism?
I am being. So I'll tell you a character I haven't mentioned, Stella. Is Stella really irritated by Pip's child? I think she is, isn't she? It hasn't, and I wonder whether they'll break up, because Rosie is such a pain in the backside. I don't know. But that's another one that I was wondering about, but that again doesn't seem to. Way back when I'm listening, that hasn't come to anything either. But they've definitely planted the seed, haven't they? There.
I'm not convinced by their relationship, to be honest. I'm just not. It just never convinced me at all.
Why not?
Because I didn't. It came out of the blue that suddenly Pip was gay. There was no sort of indication up to that point, so that surprised me.
Yeah, okay, so I wonder whether they just thought, oh my God, we've never had a gay woman in the Archers.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, they ought to have done. I mean, I absolutely accept that. But you're probably right, because there'd been never a suggestion. No.
The only one was it Antigora, who was the solicitor. She's gay, isn't she? Yeah, but she was a small, very small
she
role.
Came and went. Yeah.
We all thought Stella was going to get it together with Ruth, actually. We thought that's how it was going to go.
Yes, that did seem possible. Yeah, in the same way as it felt possible that Elizabeth would go off with Ross.
Yes.
And that didn't happen.
Yes.
So
that would have been interesting, Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think all three we've outed ourselves certainly as overthinkers about the Archers when we should be getting on with our real lives. Although, why bother? We
No.
could just be here.
Yes. No. So when you've sat on the sofa and been looking at the newspapers and listening to the Archers, who do you then go to talk to about what you've just heard?
Well, this is the problem. This is why I'm so grateful to talk to you two, because my friends who listen have all listened. They listen normally, so they're 3-4 weeks. They're up to date. And a friend I saw on Friday said, "Oh God, just fast forward and listen to that," because I said I was coming on all about the Archers. Well, you'll just embarrass yourself. You don't know what's going on. I said, "Well, no, I don't want to ruin the way I listen." But she just said she advised skipping everything, including Xander starting at school, and just bringing myself right up to date. But I won't do that because I like the slow burn, I like the big build, and I like the rough with the smooth and the tot going off to school and the massive drama as well. I like everything at its own pace.
I take, I respect your liking for the omnibus to listen it that way, but are you aware that actually you get less of the Archers by listening that way because they obviously have to cut it to time? So actually you're getting a couple of minutes less than you would by listening to it every evening, Jane.
What do you mean?
Well, because the time slot isn't all. I mean, six. It isn't 6 times 13. So actually, they have to shave a bit off to fit it in on the Sunday slot.
True.
What do they move out? What have I missed?
Well, because now
incredible thing.
But also obviously because they've moved the slot to 11. There's the news to get in now, isn't there? So it's
I
don't know. I don't think I've ever listened on the radio to the Archers. Never.
Yeah. You'll get more that way. You'll get more.
Well, I'm not changing my habits now, Quentin.
That's it.
I wouldn't say I was stuck in my ways, but
So if you were beamed into Ambridge, Jane, which food establishment would you choose to eat at? Thinking about it, we've got the Bull, we've got Grey Gables, we've got the Terham Tea Rooms, we've got.
I think I'd probably go into that. What was that? Was it the Three Sisters in Felpersham or something?
Oh yes.
French.
Oh yeah.
What was it called?
The Sir something or other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The flapjack was
Flapjack incident.
Yes. Flapjack Gate. I think that's more me.
Okay.
I would have thought there. Whilst I might live in Ambridge, I don't think I'd eat there. I really wouldn't. I might occasionally pop into the Bull and I'd sit quietly in a corner with a Perry and not bother anyone. I hope no one bothers me. I was always told I started my local radio career at BBC Hereford and Worcester, and of course the Archers is supposedly is in Worcestershire, and the boss of the station was very, very dismissive of Radio 4. He'd had his own experiences with Network, as we called it then, and he absolutely despised the Archers, and he banned us ever featuring any connection between the county and the Archers. But
ridiculous.
I did go. Well, actually, I was kind of with him at the time because I didn't like Radio 4 either. I was very much pro local radio. The village that it was supposed to be based on is Inkbarrow in Worcestershire. And have you been to Inkbarrow?
No.
Oh, it's very nice. And so I think that's part of it. I think to be sort of serious about it, one of the reasons I love the programme is because I think it takes me to Worcestershire, where I spent very happy 7 years of my life working at the local station there. I picture that area when I'm listening to it. It transports me genuinely.
Well, when I was working for the BBC and I moved into television, I did a piece years ago. I think it was in a very small Lincolnshire village or very small Leicestershire village. And they said, "You do know this is the source of the Archers?" And I said, "Well, no." And you said, you think it's in the West Midlands, but the guy who was either the first script writer or the originator who came up with the idea lived in this village. And there was a pub in the village called the Bull. And the rest is history, as they say. But it was placed in the West Midlands. It was based in the West Midlands, but this guy lived in the East Midlands. So there you go, a bit of local folklore.
I think my version is the authentic one, Quentin.
Absolutely, Jane. I mean, you've seen.
I live in Shropshire, and we say we're where Ambridge is based. So
nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Talking of Radio 4, Jane, just imagine, if the BBC was defunded and the BBC had to act either Today or The Archers, which would cause more uproar, do you think?
Oh, well, there's not even a...
Yeah,
Of
The
course we
Archers.
know what the answer is. Because, let's just be honest, you can get the news. You can get it anywhere.
Yeah.
But you can't get Ambridge anywhere
But
else.
as you know, the BBC would announce the end of the world via the Today programme, wouldn't they? That's how they would do it.
Well, I was always told that it would be Woman's Hour that did it. So, I'm not having
good.
that.
Well, Jane, we come on to some questions from our Facebook group because people are very excited to hear what you have to say.
Yes. So look, I've got some parish notices first of all, Jane. Okay, so this is to spare your blushes. Mary says, "Oh, all about the Archers, listeners. Please welcome Jane Garvey to the podcast. She is a wonderful, funny, and successful broadcaster with a large following, and she makes no secret of her love of the Archers." That's from Mary. No Lag said, "I used to think I was a massive fan of Woman's Hour and never missed an episode. I'm very proud of my feminism. Then Jane Garvey left, and I discovered I was just a massive fan of hers." That's from
Very
Mary.
kind.
That's from Mary. Julia posted, "I wish she still presented Woman's Hour," to which Claire agrees, saying, "Those were the days, eh?" While Marilyn would like us all to know that off air, The Archers and All About the Archers podcasts are 3 of my favourite listening experiences. So there you go.
Oh, that sounds very positive. Just about some of mine as well, with the exception of Off Air, which I don't listen to because I'm on it. So,
Fair enough.
So anyway, on to the questions now.
Yeah, so the first one is from Mia, who says, "Hi, Jane. This is Mia, the Newcastle University chaplain.
yes,
Where-
I know Mia.
Where would you place Fee in The Archers? The Grand Dame of Lower Loxley, running the village shop, or up a tree with a chainsaw?"
She's quite a meticulous, well-organised individual with an appetite for hard work, actually. So she could definitely run the shop. But yes, she could. She'd run the post office. She'd do it really well. She's an early riser because she gets in a cold water swim first thing in the morning. She wouldn't have any trouble with that. Give her that job, and she could busybody about the environs, and then she'd be too busy to interrupt my flow of thought when I'm saying something really interesting on our podcast. But it's a puzzle to me that she doesn't listen to the Archers, and she doesn't, and I can't convince her to enter that world. She's just not prepared to give herself over to it. I don't know what it is.
Well, I was
I
going
really
to ask you whether she really is a lost cause, because we are prepared to bribe her with an All About the Archers mug to convert her. Look at that. See,
Yes, it's lovely. I'll have one of those, please. I have tried. She's just not interested. No, don't get it. There we are. But thank you, Mia. That's a good question.
Claire next. Who is the most interesting woman in The Archers?
Well, I think Lillian really makes me laugh.
Okay.
But does that make her the most interesting? I love her. I love her chuckle. I'm not going to attempt to do that, but I love her. Is it Susan? Is Susan the most interesting? Sometimes
I'm getting
I think
more
it's
interested
Susan.
in Susan. I'm getting more interested in her.
Yeah, because she's had a proper life, hasn't she? And I haven't mentioned Neil. Neil.
I love Neil. I love Neil. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a strong, dependable, decent dullard, isn't he? Is Neil?
Say,
He really is.
boring.
He's a bit boring. He had a sort of back in the day did he have a thing with Shula, or did she have a thing for him?
Well, it was
yes.
Yeah,
And more recently with the
And more
lasagna
recently.
dish that he returned.
That's right. Yeah. So who's the most interesting? Oh, gosh, I mean, as you can tell, I'm struggling with this because I pretty much like all of them. There's nobody I don't find interesting. And the Linda storylines, I think maybe we need to just stop her taking charge of everything,
Yes.
and give her. Is it her is Mungo her stepson? I don't know. I get a bit
Yes, and
confused with
Lillian's.
her. her wide.
yeah.
I get very confused with all that. Yeah. So yes, I hope that's a rather poor answer. But there aren't really any characters I dislike, to be honest.
Oh, really? Okay.
No.
Well, you are rare.
No.
Because
Yeah.
I think, I mean, Linda drives us all nuts, but I particularly like the scenes, and we had a few of them when she'd been involved in that accident, the explosion, and she had those scenes with Lillian. They were very, very good, and actually you saw a different side to the character, and they were very well acted and well scripted. And
I think the older I get as well, the more sympathy I have with women who get done, because they're easy to mock, and every community has one of those women.
Yeah.
Philippa's nodding. She lives in Shropshire. She knows what I'm talking about. And I realise that Britain wouldn't work without them. So they are much mocked, but they're also fantastic, and they're a great resource. Where would we be without them?
Precisely.
So all hail her.
All hail.
The next question is from Fiona, who asks, if you could make a guest appearance in The Archers, would you like to appear as yourself or as a character? Although she adds, possibly not as a resident in the Laurels.
No, not quite yet a resident in the Laurels. As Fee points out, we used to have a twin room booked in the Home for the Impartial but Infirm. But now we've left the BBC. We don't know where we're going to end our days. So, that was a good line of hers, actually. So that's why I'm happy to repeat it. Yeah, brilliant. She's very good. The Laurels does sound quite nice. So I wouldn't mind booking in there. What was the question? Where would I like to appear?
Would you appear as yourself or as a character?
I think people appearing as themselves. Remember when Princess Margaret was on? It was terrible. I don't think I was a listener at the time, but it was quite a major news story. And they get people to come in and open things, don't they? Like when Ryland came, and I'm not a big fan of those things. I always thought that Jean Harvey, who's one of those characters they mention, this is what an egomaniac I am. I thought it was Jane Garvey. So whenever they said Jean Harvey, I'd think, oh my God, why are they referencing me? How marvellous! I must ring my mum. But it wasn't. It was Jean Harvey. So, but whenever I hear her name, I think, oh, me again. Yeah. No. So I kind of think I'm in it in my own desperate way. Yeah.
Right.
Pathetic.
Nikki would like to know, which 4 characters would you choose to be marooned on a desert island with, and why?
Well, that's fair. So let's do the men. Brian and Harrison. Brian, because he'd wear a cravat and make me laugh. Harrison, because he'd wear a vest, and I think he's practical.
Yes. Yeah.
Not Alistair, who I find... Actually, Alistair, I'm not sure about Alistair, and I'll just leave it there. So not him. And I quite like... Which of the women would I have with me? Well, I like Ruth, so I'd have Ruth and I'd have Jill just for the baking. Not just for the baking, but obviously for the baking. So that's isn't it?
Would you not have Stella, who's pretty practical?
Well, I thought we decided we weren't sure about Stella. Or is it just that we're not sure about her relationship with Pip?
But you want to get off the island, Jane, so...
Well, not necessarily if Harrison's there.
not if Brian and Harrison are there, yeah.
But yes, Quentin, I do want to get off the island, yes. Yes. It's been a long day.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm just hoping that Alistair's gambling storyline comes back up at some point. It was so interesting.
Yes, I do think, that was interesting. And on the whole, I think, as we've acknowledged, they're very, very good at never letting things disappear completely. You know, if somebody's got a character trait, it springs back to the surface at some point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Very true. Yeah. The next question is from Sinead, who asks, what is your favourite ever storyline?
Gosh, if I'm honest, I mean, the powerful storylines like George and Alice at the moment, and obviously Rob Titchener was that was something that certainly we talked about on Woman's Hour, and I have to say the response from the audience was off the scale. That was something that people really felt strongly about. They are very powerful, and they are at times very moving, those stories. But if I'm honest, I really do enjoy just investing in the minutiae of family life. I haven't mentioned Eddie Grundy, but I love Eddie's, and we haven't had enough of them actually, his business ventures that are doomed to failure, and the cider club and all this stuff. That's why I listen. And those brilliant conversations between the late great Jenny and Brian about what he was going to have for his bogging lunch when she was going out. That's really, I mean, and the saga of Jenny's kitchen. I just, that's really why I listen. Not for the big drama, which
Really? Okay.
propels you along. But it's not the audio comfort blanket that I'm really looking for.
Interesting. Right. Okay, Andy says, as a great broadcaster, how does Jane rate Susan's broadcasting abilities after her stint on Radio Borsetshire?
Actually, I was going to say, I'm really glad that's come up. Really good question. Thank you. I don't
There's
think
more.
I've never...
There's more.
Oh, sorry.
He says, could Susan ever replace Fee on their podcast? And would she be welcome to share a studio with Jane? There you go.
Susan is played by, is it Charlotte Martin?
Yeah.
Yes, who's an academic
Charlotte.
as well, isn't she? Yes,
Yeah.
and I think she's excellent. I've been to an event that she did at a local literary festival. It was really good. No, I often think that national radio does local radio very badly, and as a proud graduate of local radio,
Like me.
I actually thought, I actually thought that storyline was a bit insulting, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it was a bit,
Yeah, that did not ring true for me, and I actually wish they hadn't done it. There, I've come over all serious, but I actually, no, they shouldn't have done that.
So she's welcome on your podcast anyway, is she?
She's welcome anytime, but Fee won't know who she is, so it's wasted effort.
A question from Tamsin, which ties into something we've already discussed a little bit. What future do you see, Jane, for Fallon and Harrison?
Well, I'm afraid I don't. And isn't that interesting that listeners had the same thought? You see, I also think, and it's also another good plot line about Harrison's interest in religion, because I'm not religious, and I think I would struggle with someone who had sought comfort in a place that I didn't fully understand, and I think she's been rather gracious about all that. But at the same time, I'm a contradictory listener, because I actually thought that when she found out she was pregnant, it was going to be their happy ending, and wasn't that going to be lovely? And I was so delighted for them. And then, of course, she just doesn't want children, and that's her viewpoint. So anyway, I don't necessarily think they'll go on to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, I have to say.
Okay.
But he won't be on the market for long.
Well, he'll be on your desert island anyway, won't he?
Yes, he's with me and Brian.
Okay, Dawn says, I think Jane is amazing. She has a great recognisable voice, which for radio is perfect. And she then says, would Jane fancy being the continuity announcer trailing and introducing Archer's episodes?
Would I? I don't think they'd have me as a continuity announcer.
Oh, you'd be
on Radio
brilliant.
4.
You'd be so
No,
irreverent. You'd be irreverent.
Well, I
It'd be
think-
great.
I think Radio 4's doing fine without me, to be perfectly honest. So
No.
it would be lovely to think otherwise, but I feel on the whole it's progressing just fine. I mean, there's not a broadcaster in the world who doesn't secretly think they're indispensable, and then you leave and you realise nobody gives a... just go, woman, go.
Well, I'd forgotten this, but my wife, Emma, briefly had an attachment as a continuity announcer down at Radio 4.
Right.
And she introduced the Archers once. And I went, what? And because she doesn't listen like Fee, she's not bothered. She didn't care. And I was like, my tongue was hanging out of my mouth. But she has introduced the Archers. Yeah, great honour. Yeah.
It must have been, and I've never done that. So I left having never introduced the Archers or read the shipping forecast.
Oh,
But I did once, sitting in on Radio 2, say, we'll have more on the death of Baroness Thatcher in a moment, after Justin Timberlake and Mirrors.
And you will never forget that.
And nor will anyone else. No.
The next question is from Noleg, who asks, who in the Archers would be most likely to get an off-air tote bag, and who would Jane like to give a tote bag to?
Okay, I think of all the people in Ambridge, I suspect Fallon might be most inclined to listen to off-air, and I'd be happy to send her a tote bag, and she could put all her belongings into it, and then she could leave Harrison, and the rest of us could be in with a chance.
Brilliant.
Okay. Marilyn says, you sort of touched this already, but given Jane's record for predictions on off-air, how does she think the Alice George scenario will pan out?
I don't know how it will pan out, but what I do know is that Alice is an alcoholic, and she's not going to stop being an alcoholic even when all this is over. And so, I've been talking a bit about happy endings for Fallon, and there won't, however this sort of unfurls as a saga, she is still left with her alcoholism, and that's I'm very interested to hear how they portray that, because it's not easy, and it won't be easy for her. And I think the kind of great love story in a way in The Archers is Alice and Chris, isn't it? And yeah, my sort of sentimental side really wants them to get back together, and I am a lousy foreseer of the future, but I'm here to tell you they will get back together, possibly at Christmas.
Last night they had a lingering embrace. Okay, I'll say no more.
Stop! Now that is a spoiler, Quentin.
Sorry. No more. Right.
Next question is from Sally, who asks, when you had your much longed for lunch with Ken Follett, did you discuss The Archers? My understanding is Ken doesn't listen to The Archers. That's what his team told me.
Okay. It was a lovely lunch, and no, we didn't once reference The Archers. I'm really sorry. Ken took me to the Ritz, but people need to know this wasn't any kind of a date. Ken is extremely happily married. It was a charity. Anyway, it was a lovely lunch. It really was.
Okay. And finally, from Alison, people seem to want you to form panels here, but if you were asked to be on the panel of loose women, which Ambridge ladies would you take with you, and what topic would you like to be discussed?
Who would I? Well, I'd obviously take Linda, and I'd take Linda, Lillian, and another from the younger community. Who would you? I'm going to throw that one back to you. Which of the younger women do you think would do well? Mia, of course, because she's got a view on everything.
Chelsea.
And Chelsea, yeah.
Chelsea would be fun. Chelsea would be fun.
She would be. Yeah, she would be. And I think the four of us would have a cracking time on Loose Women. Don't know why they haven't already done it, to be honest.
Have you got a topic in mind you'd like to talk about?
Oh, I think quantitative easing.
That's perfect. And on that note, we must say goodbye. Jane, thank you so much for joining us today. It's just been wonderful to talk to you.
Well, it's a great pleasure, Philippa. Thank you, and thank you, Quentin. And just lovely to be in the company of people who actually think more about this than I do, and I actually feel quite cleansed. So thank you both.